Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Interviews with Entrepreneurs in South Africa. Today, I'm super excited to be talking to one of my dearest friends and longtime mentors, Colleen Jack. For those of you watching, Colleen has mentored me through some of the toughest transitions in my career, and I feel super blessed to be talking to her today with all of you. So Colleen, if you will just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your business.
Okay, and so firstly, Melly, you know how I feel about you. I do consider myself incredibly privileged to have you in my circle under my tree. And so it's an absolute pleasure to be here. So I have a background in the clothing industry. I won't say how long ago, but yes, it's now 30 years, so that ages me. But I started in the clothing industry specializing as a pattern maker and a grader. And over the years, I've taken that specialization into consulting. And so I will consult clothing houses on their basic blocks and how to get their fit standardized for their service that they offer to their customers. And so sizing is always an issue, and there are many ways to work sizes and work the correct sizes, but it all hangs off the basic block in developing the fit for their customers' range. I also consult on how to cost garments on a standard costing so that you know whether or not to produce the garment. And I promise you it'll save every client 1,000 drops of tears and bank managers from pulling their hair out. And then, of course, how to develop cutting orders and why cutting orders are so important. I will also consult on how to develop your ranges and how to develop the styles within that range and how many of that style per colorway, per size, one would need to cut in order to break even. And so, yes, that is imperative that more and more young designers entering into the market or hobbyists who need to now create an income off their sewing have the tools in order to make making garments cost effective and pleasurable and valuable, that they can actually cost it with their time involved and make money off their designs.
So for those of you who are watching, I know Colleen's not likely to mention this, so I'm going to mention it right now. I actually met Colleen Jack in Marianne Fasler's studio, and she also spent many years working for Clive Rundle. So this really is the pinnacle of South African talent in the fashion industry that we have the privilege of speaking to today.
Okay, and so yes, I am a master pattern maker and a master grader, and I have consulted anything from correctional services making vests where we can produce a vest in 4 minutes from cut, make to finish, wow, to consulting Oprah Winfrey with Marianne Fasler. When Oprah Winfrey opened the Leadership Academy in South Africa, they consulted with me on getting the blazers fitted specifically for South African young girls, because we do have unusual body shapes in South Africa. And then, of course, I was very privileged to be able to exhibit with Clive Rundle at New York Fashion Week in the gardens. So that was amazing. Actually, in the library of New York Fashion Week. So yes, I have a skill set of understanding clothing from couture all the way down to making a t-shirt.
And I've been to a couple of your workshops and things, and I was absolutely amazed and stunned at your depth of experience and knowledge that you're able to share with your students.
Yeah, so when I realized that colleges, and there are about 30 independent colleges in South Africa, if I'm not mistaken, Mel, it's around there, that are producing degrees, diplomas or honors degrees in the clothing industry, that I was having to dumb down my coaching sessions with them as a mentor. I developed a masterclass. There are 7 masterclasses that we run specifically tailored to people entering into the clothing industry, whether they're designers or people who've always had a love for fashion who are now looking to earn an extra income. And so these masterclasses serve to take somebody through the basics without having to go and study for 3 years, because we are not necessarily interested in producing more pattern makers, but we are interested in producing entrepreneurs who understand how to audit a pattern, or how to cost a garment, or how to put a cutting order together so that the factory will produce what you've asked them to produce in the time that you've asked them to produce. And what happens with your offcuts, what happens with your pattern and your intellectual capital and your intellectual property when you let those patterns out to a factory, or you ask a pattern maker to make your designs, what happens with that IP? So yes, those masterclasses serve for entrepreneurs in the clothing industry.
I think that's such a valuable service that you offer as a bridge between what the existing institutions are doing and what is needed. Because I think there are a lot of people who start up as fashion designers who really experience challenges in a lot of those tiers that you were talking about earlier, because they don't have that knowledge to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm going to be a little bit subversive here, saying that the problem with our education is that we are producing designers, and that, you know, producing fabulous fashion illustrations for me are absolutely useless. They do not empower you as an entrepreneur to actually enter the clothing industry and make money. You are not being paid for your fabulous illustrations. And the truth is, you know, in the old days when I studied, you would have to save up a fortune to buy the collezioni to see what was happening in Italy in the next season. Nowadays, you go onto the internet and you type in autumn, winter, fall, spring 2021, asymmetric knit designs, ladies' tops, and you wouldn't have to pick up a pencil to do any design work. Yes. And so stop calling yourself a designer. You have got nothing to do with fashion. You're in the clothing industry and you are a manufacturer. We do not need more fashion designers. We need people with artisanal skills, and where the creativity is not serving us, we need the practical. Is this garment going to make money? And so I am going to sound subversive again. Most often in my mentor business coaching sessions in the clothing industry, I drown puppies and kittens. What I mean by that is, take it from me, who's here to support you and really is very passionate about our industry, to drown your puppy or your kitten in that business session with me. Because there is a place where those creative ideas are not going to feed your family.
Yes.
They are wonderful creative expressions. They are not going to earn money. They will never clear the research and development costs in the time that you have wasted in your creative expression. Yes. We are here to produce an income through clothing. It has got very little to do with fashion. And there are very few fashion designers in South Africa. And they are Marion Flassler, Clive Rundle, and a few others. And Clive is the only designer, and I have freelanced for many, many South African designers who will actually give me an original picture drawn in his hand. Not from the collezioni, not can you do this with this, and here's a picture, and look at this, and you see that shape. He will draw original drawings. Very few other designers will give me an original drawing. Most South African designers were, can you copy this garment exactly?
Yes, yes. Now, our clothing industry has shrunk, certainly since the 70s, when it kind of was in its heyday. What do you think the keys are to rejuvenating and regenerating the industry?
I've said it already, stop producing fashion designers, start producing artisanal trades. We need cutters, graders, pattern makers, sewers, finishers, ironing. We need those kind of artisanal trades. And so you and I both lived through the 80s in the clothing industry, where the pandemic of AIDS blew through factories. And I'm very proud as a woman in the clothing industry where our sisterhood would have protected people who were dying on those clothing lines until their last moment, because our sisters banded together to ensure that on average, one machinist's wage feeds 8 people. Mm. And so those women who should have survived the AIDS pandemic would have been sample hands today. And so we have an echelon of women who died out in the 80s who would now be very, very experienced sample hands. And so we lack experienced machinists who can produce a garment from a drawing without anything else to copy from. And so that is what a sample hand would be. They would produce the first garment, the test garment, to see, is the size right, is the fitting right, is the styling lines right? And so we've lost a whole echelon of sample machinists. And unfortunately, where the young women would have been coming in as young machinists who would now be quite experienced, were trained as fashion designers instead of machinists. Okay. And so we have fashion designers who are able to design, but not actually able to sew or produce a garment. And so my feeling is, get intimate with your business. You don't have to be a machinist, but you do have to know how to sew.
Okay. Okay. Those are some very valuable insights. What do you enjoy most about what you do?
I think it's about being able to climb into somebody's head and extrude the information and put it into a practical demonstration of well, this is actually how it'll look. So often with a designer, when they brought me drawings, and I did a time study of this. I once did a time study of somebody's T-shirt, and it took me 18 minutes to understand and interpret the drawing, and 4 minutes to make the pattern. And of course, I charged them for 22 minutes, because it's not the 4 minutes of pattern making, it's the knowledge in the 18 minutes that's able to extract the information. So often what I see as naive drawings is the designers have not thought properly around what fabric translation they're using. So is it a woven or is it a knit? That'll affect the block of the pattern. They haven't shown the openings. And so I spend time saying, how are you getting into this garment? Where is the opening? Is it knit so we can pull it over their heads, or is there buttoning at the back? What am I not seeing in your drawing? And so really to have a designer think through their designs practically to say, okay, how am I actually getting into this garment? What will it wear like? Who will be wearing it? And so, this glorious fitted tailored jacket with a wonderful narrow sleeve pipe. Okay, will she ever be able to drive a car and change gears? Because that fit comes with a compromise. If it's a woven jacket, she will not be able to move her arms to move onto the steering wheel. And I was a fitting model in my youth. It was one of the very, very good gifts that Gordon Flack I studied with Gordon Flack Davidson gave me, was I was the right size to be a fitting model. And in the year that I studied with him, I learned a fortune about fit. And I can remember a designer insisting that the sleeve pipe had to be as narrow as it was. And I said to her, look, I think that's going to be a problem. And I was shushed because I was only the fitter. And I stood there for half an hour while they fitted the rest of the garment, and they had to cut me out of the sleeve. Because all the blood had pooled in my hand while I was standing like a clothes hanger. And you learn immediately. If the model is telling you it's too tight, there's a problem. I've had a million matric dance dress girls saying, oh, it's got to be like all the way down tight. Sit.
Yes.
And the seams, the hip joints move.
Yes.
So understand in fittings what the difference is between a body measurement and a pattern measurement. Because in between those two measurements is garment ease, and that accommodates all the lateral movement in the body. So as the scapula move across the body and the latissimus dorsi and yes, I'm talking about anatomy here, understand the anatomy of the body. Because the minute I flex my arms, it draws in the latissimus dorsi, and that will increase the circumference. So always ask the girl to cough.
Okay.
And if she can't expand her ribs, she can't breathe. So she gets started at the matric dance and she suddenly gets lightheaded because she hasn't been able to take a breath. Fabulous, looks fantastic, can't breathe.
Yes.
Ask people to sit, because the minute the hips move, they will move the glutimus maximus, and that will take up more space. So understand the difference between a body measurement, a pattern measurement, and in that is garment ease. And that is critical. So you can have a fitted garment, but you will still have body ease in it.
Those are such valuable insights for anybody in the clothing industry who's watching right now. Thank you so much, Colleen. And so where will we find your master classes and your courses? How can people get in touch with you if they would like to sign up and tap into your knowledge?
So there are a couple of ways. I have written a blog, so I will give you the blog post to follow. I'll email that to you now. I realize now that I've forgotten about that. Yes, I don't tend to talk about this stuff, Mel, so you've got to draw it out of me because I don't open other ones. So what I've done is that I think there are 12 posts on the blog, and they are in various different categories. And I have a philosophy that I give my knowledge away for free as much as possible. And that way you don't have to steal it. But also because we've lost so much knowledge in the clothing industry, it's absolutely vital that, you know, people like you and I who have not only survived the clothing industry, but thrived in the clothing industry, that we stand as knowledge bases for the people who are going to be coming up generationally. So I have a blog that's easily accessible, that people can go and have a read in their own time, and they cover various different things, like the difference between commercial pattern making and designer pattern making for couturier wear. There's a blog around fabric adventures and the limitations of the fabric suppliers in Southern Africa, because we have lost a lot of our mills. As you know, 1 year alone, we lost 7 mills. On average, at one point, we were losing about 1,500 factories a month.
Wow.
Producing cut, make, and trim, so CMTs. And I have to say, I have deep concerns with Equidale at the moment. If they go under, and they are likely to during this process with COVID-19, the knock-on effect is tragic into the clothing industry with cut, make, and trims, and all of the other associated industries like printers and textiles and packaging and boxes and hangers. All of those people will not have jobs going forward. It's cataclysmic. So the blog sits there in perpetuity for a knowledge base to come back to any time they need. You can email me, so that's Colleen at patternworks.co.za, and I will send out a free database of cut, make, and trim factories, fabric suppliers, digital pattern makers, and manual pattern makers. And I am expecting an uprising of manual pattern makers, with many home sews now needing to earn more income.
Yes, yes.
I do offer myself as a business coach and mentor, and there's an hourly rate associated with that. And the master classes are generally put together when we've got a group between 10 and 12 people. I like that kind of small, intimate group. It also makes incredible networking opportunities within the people there. And so those master classes I will run periodically. And
how long are the master classes for? Is it a 1 day, a 4-week process?
Mel, there are 7 classes of 3 hours each. And so there are different ways that we can do it. We can run it over 7 weeks on a Saturday morning or an afternoon, or I can run them intensely over 3.5 days with 2 sessions a day. It is intense. And we honestly use the group as a democracy to decide when to run those. You know, do they want it over 7 weeks, or do we want it quick and intense? They are intense, and within the masterclass, there's a 155-page manual that I've written or used other people's information with permission, but most of it is written, it's my own material, over 22 years of understanding and development and square rooting, and what I cover in the masterclasses is actually above and beyond what's in the manual. And at the moment I am exploring how to put it online, because I don't think we're going to get through COVID that quickly. And I think I've always wanted them online, curated, accessible, evergreen, so that the delegates can own their own learning. And if you want to study at 2 in the morning because you can't sleep, then go and look at the learning management system and go and access it. So that is in process at the moment. And yeah, watch the space. But for the moment, we will run master classes face to face. And so at the moment, I'm not running them.
Okay. I love that your master classes, you allow people to decide whether they want to do it over 7 weeks or in 3 days, and that is that flexible. I think that's going to make them accessible to a lot more people out there.
Yeah, we found that it's always tough, because often it's still women, and often it's young women with children. And so it's always about how to get 3 hours away from young kids. And so often they would have their partners available more on a Saturday, where they could step away either in the morning or the afternoon, and hubby would step in, or partner or granny would step in, and so they could be a mom and then be a businesswoman for 3 hours and go to a class and come back. But we've also found that 7 weeks can be very difficult for a partner to manage when they've also got often side hustles. And
yes.
So sometimes the 3.5 days intensive is just, you know, rope in granny, do what you need to. And if there's a housekeeper involved or a nanny involved, that it is during work hours. And so there's no extra cost for them to have to pay for a housekeeper or a nanny to come in on overtime. So yes, I do always consider who the target market is, and that it is often still young mums who are developing a line of clothing or are doing this as a side hustle.
You have shared such amazing information. Thank you. I think even people who are just watching this little clip now are going to learn a great deal from what you shared with us today. Thank you. You always blow me away.
Can I share another passion?
Please.
And I know that this is part of your passion. And so, fabric. And so firstly, there are very few fabric suppliers, if you are going to be doing a range, that will give you originality. We're all buying from the same suppliers. And so I am passionate about how to create fabric that is a little bit more original. And of course, that's where you and I started our original adventure around, you know, bespoke dyeing cloth. But over the years, I've become more and more conscientized around how fabric is very, very water expensive. And that if we are going to be buying fabric, to understand the impact that that fabric has had before you even cut it on ecology. And so I'm absolutely passionate about creating patterns that use fabric effectively. And so the square area of a pattern rating must take into consideration the waste. And it is never waste, it's offcuts. How are we utilizing those offcuts? And so always, if you are outsourcing your cutting to a factory, ask for the offcuts. I want every little scrap. I want to decide what the scraps are. And so for me, nothing is thrown away, but like a dart. And that in itself is not thrown away. We collect those and we use that in the townships for weaving mats or filling pillows. Nothing is ever thrown away. The rest of the offcuts, anything that is at least 3 centimeters by 3 centimeters or an inch by an inch, can be used in patchworks. And so I'm passionate about patchworking. I collect all of the offcuts, and it might take me 5 years to collect the offcuts. And then I sit and cut squares on cold winter nights where maybe my family is watching something on Netflix. And it will take me about a day to create 3 meters out of scraps. And those 3 meter fabrics that are now totally original and absolutely beautiful are then converted into 1950s one-piece patterns where we are just using foldings to drape into jackets. So nothing is ever wasted in fabric. We have to be cognizant as designers that those pattern ratings must be clean. And if it means taking a little bit of a volume off so that you can get the triangles facing up and down to slip into each other, there are ways to create very, very beautiful styles with very good ratings. And so I would like to talk more about how we can create an ecologically sound and sustainable system within a system where it's already very water expensive.
I love that. Yay. So would you be open to doing a couple more of these chats with me?
I'm so open.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the topics that I feel are not spoken about or educated enough from college leavers or as an entrepreneur, how to get that knowledge are how to do a proper costing, to decide whether or not to drown that puppy or kitten. How to do a proper cutting order if you're going to be using a cut, make and trim factory so that your envisioned understanding will be translated by a machinist. How to do a proper costing on your time.
Yes.
And in the clothing industry, we do not cost per hour, we cost per minute. And so how to understand what your fixed costs are in the business, and then to understand, once you have covered your fixed costs, what is your hourly rate as a laborer? And bearing in mind that the entrepreneur is the highest capital in that business. They are the highest asset, and most people never cost their time in as an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And so I would love to talk more around how to actually cost onto a standard minute so that you can understand that your time is valuable and that we start valuing your time as an entrepreneur. Because without you as the entrepreneur in the business, you have no business.
Absolutely.
So yes, now if there's an interest for it, pick me.
Yay. Okay.
And no, I mean, there's many topics. It's also just how to start designing for a rating.
Yes.
So that we can understand what we're actually looking for in a rating.
Yes.
How to scramble a marker so that when you are cutting, how to cut effectively, and how to actually, what you're losing on the swings, you make up on the roundabout by laying the patterns. There's tons. There's so many things. I mean, this morning I was doing a coaching session with somebody, and I asked her what was the most useful thing that she took out of the session today. And she said, the fact that I sew in colorways. So remember, your pattern development is very expensive. So you set a day aside to do that. The following day, you set aside just for cutting, because cutting again is very labor expensive. And when we cost in a factory, the sewing machinists cover the wages of everyone else.
Wow.
The rent, the light, the water, the tea lady, the cutter, the person who sweeps the floor is all covered by the machinists.
Yes.
So if you are making one-off garments, cluster the cutting, and then when your sewing comes, you bundle it into color order.
Okay.
And so whatever you need to do on your overlocker on the black, you just do the overlocking. Bundle that work up, change color thread, and then you just sewing the white garments. And then you move on to your plain machinist and you break it down as you would in a factory line. And so we would do a time study on just the amount of time you're wasting between getting up and changing thread, or getting up to get the next garment, when instead you could break it down into sewing operations and utilize your minute, your standard minute where you're earning off, to be more effective in your production.
Wow. You blow my mind every time I interact with you.
I'm so excited about this stuff. I am so passionate about it because we can literally give women and young people and men an opportunity to earn an income off their passion.
Yes. So I see we're coming near the end of our time. Thank you for all of this today, and I am definitely going to schedule some more of these with you to add to our groups on Facebook and all of that, because I think that you have a lot to teach, and I find it very exciting that we can maybe be foundational in regrowing our very sick industry.
On practical, effective, well understood processes and practices that are based in good understanding, not some frou-frou creative idea that's, oh, I love, it's got nothing to do with that. This is how we will empower people to feed their families.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Colleen.
Pleasure, Mel. And then they can you give me feedback on what the topics are and we'll go on that adventure.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.